Okay, so continuing from part 1 of this recording, we are now on part 2, which is going to talk about how we convert. We already talked about converting from this general form to the standard form, and now we're going to talk about converting from the standard form back to the general graphing form. So here we have an equation, x squared plus 6x plus y squared minus 2y plus 6 equals 0. We want to put it in graphing form because obviously the graphing form is easier to graph. We can pull out the center, which is that HK, and the radius really easily from that form. When we are looking at this general form here, we have a hard time graphing from that form. So we want to be able to move it back to the graphing form. So step 1 is if there's a constant term, we move it to the other side of the equation. So let's start there. X squared plus 6x plus y squared minus 2y plus 6 equals 0. The constant, remember, is the term that doesn't have a variable. So that's our 6. We want to move it to the other side of the equation. That's step 1. So we subtract 6. We have x squared plus 6x. And I'm going to leave some space here, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Plus y squared minus 2y. I'm going to leave some space again. Equals, and now we have negative 6 from that 0 minus 6. And I left space because step 2 is to complete the square. So you've talked about completing the square before, but this will be a refresher. We want to complete the square for both the x and the y variables. We have to add to both sides when we are completing the square. A, as in the coefficient of the x term, divided by 2 squared, and then b, as in the coefficient of the y term, divided by 2 squared. What that looks like for us is 6 divided by 2 squared. Remember, you have to add it to both sides, and we're adding, let me put my plus sign here, or else it changes the equation if you don't add to both sides. So make sure you add to both sides. And then for y, it's negative 2, so plus negative 2 divided by 2 squared. And then we just simplify. It says write each perfect square trinomial as the square of a binomial. We want to simplify. 6 over 2 is 3, so that's a plus 3 squared. Negative 2 over 2 is negative 1 squared. And then we'll simplify the right-hand side in just a minute here. But what we want to do is be able to write each perfect square trinomial as the square of a binomial. All we have to do is take the x plus the a over 2 and then square that whole thing. That's how we would write this as a perfect square. So we would say x plus 3. This is completing the square here, just writing that as a perfect square. This factors down to x plus 3 squared. Notice if we expanded x plus 3 times x plus 3, we would get x squared plus 6x plus 9, which would be that 3 squared. Plus y, and then our b over 2 there was negative 1. So you plug that in. And then we want to simplify this right-hand side that we had. So that was negative 6, and then 6 over 2 was 3 squared, so plus 9. And then negative 2 over 2 was negative 1 squared, so plus 1. And we have negative 6. Well, let's rewrite our left-hand side so we can make sure everyone can see it. Negative 6 plus 9 plus 1, that gives us 4. And so the center, step 4 is to identify center and radius. Center would be negative 3 would be the h because it's, remember, the opposite sign of what it looks like there. And then 1 would be the k. The radius is the square root of what you see on this right-hand side. So the radius would be the square root of 4, which is 2. There's your center, there's your radius. So that's how we would go about actually finding the information we need for a circle that is in the standard form. So here is one with the center and radius of a circle of the equation x squared plus y squared minus 20x plus 2y minus 10 equals 0. So we want to follow our steps and actually solve this one. And today's ticket out the door password is center, so I'm going to write that here. Ticket out the door is center, just so y'all have that. Ticket out the door password is center. Okay, so we want to use our steps here to actually convert this to being an equation that we can actually work with to find the center and the radius. So we want to group the x's and the y's together first, because remember, we know we have to complete the square. So we're going to group the x's and the y's, and we're also going to move this constant over to the other side. We talked about that as our first step in actually completing the square here. So x squared, and I'm going to go ahead and group our x's, so x squared minus 20x. And then we're going to leave some, well, we're going to just go ahead and write the y squared. We'll space it out in just a moment. Y squared plus 2y equals 10. We added that 10 to both sides, so it's gone here, and we have 10 instead of 0. Now we are going to complete the square on both the x's and the y's. So remember, that means taking the coefficient in front of x, dividing by 2, and squaring it. So negative 20 divided by 2 squared plus y squared plus 2y plus that 2. So we're taking that 2 divided by 2 and squaring it. And we have to do this to both sides. So then on the right side, we're running out of room, so I apologize there, but 10 plus same thing. You have to add those same things to both sides, or else our equation changes. So do not forget that part. Super important. So then this simplifies. Negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10 squared. And then 2 divided by 2, well, that's just 1 squared. And what this does is this helps us to figure out what we're actually squaring, what binomial is being squared here for the x's and the y's. It's x minus 10. You just use this number here, that's all. Squared. And then y plus 1. And you can always check your answer by expanding it and making sure you get this trinomial back for each one. Then we simplify the right side out. 10 plus, well, that negative 20 over 2 is negative 10 squared is 100. And then 2 over 2 is 1. Squared is just 1. So we end up with x minus 10 squared plus y plus 1 squared is equal to 111. So the center is the h, okay? Remember, the signs are opposite of what they look like. So since it's x minus h is 10. And then y minus k means k is negative 1. So 10, negative 1, it has to be either a or b. These are backwards. And then the radius, we just square, or take the square root, excuse me, because remember, this is r squared from the formula. So that's r squared, which means to find the actual radius, we take square root. So the correct answer would be B. Center of 10, negative 1, radius of square root 111. So it is now time to take your ticket out the door. Remember, password is center. And then, and this is not my information, so you can ignore that. And then 4.01a quiz today. 4.01b quiz is tomorrow. And email me if you have any questions.